Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by The Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to day one of the off season for all 32 teams. Cole, how are you this evening?
Recovering from the flu, so this is my flu game a little bit, but I'm good. I'm glad to get this rolling.
Cool. So Cole has something pretty special put together. Cole has gone through and looked at the draft trends of 32 teams and has identified 32 different skill players that would be a scheme fit for each team according to him. So, Cole, how do you want to kind of kick this off? Is there a team that's at the top of your list that you want to do first?
Let's get the Super Bowl champs out of the way. Let's start off with the Eagles. Not necessarily a team that I would say needs to have another wide receiver besides maybe a fourth guy, but just kind of looking at how they like doing things. I really like Jalen Royals' fit on that team as a 3 if they were to. I'm not sure if Jahan Dotson has another year or 2 left on his contract, but get him in as that 3, kind of that deep threat guy that you can have go in there as a little bit more of a speedster and a route runner, but can go in there at a 3 spot, can come in on probably like 20 offensive snaps a game and come in and move the chains once or twice. Look, they had guys like Jeremy Maclin. They had guys like Nelson Aguilar. And while I don't think that Jalen Rose is as fast or kind of as imposing as a downfield threat as them, I think that is a very similar type of role to how their team's history has been. Even looking at with Howie Roseman and that blunder with Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, he always kind of leans towards that deep, stretch the field, fast, kind of twitchy type of guy. While I think Justin Jefferson was that at that time, Jalen Reagor as a prospect, while not as good and was overdrafted, was also kind of that mold. And while I kind of see that with Jalen Royals as well.
Okay. And who do you have next on your list?
We'll just keep going down the line. We'll go down the NFC East. We'll go with the Dallas Cowboys. When I'm looking at them, I really find interest in – I'm not just doing wide receivers either. I'm going to do tight ends, running backs, those guys, that type of kind of wheel out there. If I'm looking at tight end, I'm really looking at Terrence Ferguson is a guy I like for them. They have a guy like Luke Schoonmaker, who is my comp for Terrence Ferguson. They kind of, they love that vertical seam threat. That's Dak's favorite ball. We had talked about in the group chat earlier that Dak Prescott is a heavy seam ball thrower. He throws one of the prettiest seam balls in the league, and that's where Terrence Ferguson really excels as an inline, down the field type of receiving threat. I could totally see him fitting into that offense, and with them just signing Ken Dorsey to be their offensive coordinator, that's a great spot for Terrence Ferguson.
So this is Owen from Thursday night's podcast.
That's another great shout. I didn't even think about Gadsden. I love that a lot too.
Cool. What do you have next for the NFC East?
Commanders. So look, I'm looking at a guy, Matthew Golden, very, very similar, I feel like, to Terry McLaurin. And while I don't necessarily think that they're going to draft the wide receiver in the first round, they very well could. And I don't think they will, but I could see them targeting one early. And with this Matthew Golden hype, it's hard to kind of project where he goes. I have a second on him, but very, very similar player to Terry McLaurin. And you see what they also did there with Jahan Dotson when he was drafted. That same type of route runner, same type of build, and not necessarily a crazy athlete, but a good enough athlete to get by. Another thing is with Adam Peters is they drafted Brandon Ayuk, which is, while Ayuk might be a little bit more crafty after the catch, Ayuk's a really good route runner, probably like top 20 in the league. So that's kind of a trend with Adam Peters is he likes those heavy route runner types of wide receivers, and Matthew Golden is a really interesting name to throw out there in Washington. And then going into New York with the Giants, and I'm not exactly sure if they're going to end up targeting a wide receiver early. They need to, but they also need to target a lot more pieces like their quarterback and their offensive line and running back and so and so. But with that being said, I'm going to stick on that wide receiver track. I really, really, really like the idea of Trey Harris to New York. They had that type of guy with Isaiah Hodgins, that bigger body wide receiver who can push it down the field vertically. And Trey Harris does that exact same thing. And while he's not a refined route runner, you kind of see that type of deal with – they had Isaiah Hodgins in Buffalo with Dable on the practice squad, and I'm not sure if he got meaningful snaps. You're probably more educated on him getting snaps with Buffalo than I am. He got meaningful snaps in 2022, I believe, in that Giants playoff run. They also had Kenny Golladay in free agency. That was their big name signing for that new regime in New York. So Trey Harris is a great scheme fit there, and a guy that I could totally see going to the Giants in the second round if they decided to go in that receiver in that day 2 range.
So I think Hodgins at Buffalo, I think he only made the practice squad, and he did get a few elevations during the season, but I believe the Giants actually grabbed him off of Buffalo's practice squad.
Yeah, they did, and then they really started using him again. 2022, and then I don't really know.
The big body part you got right, because he was added to Buffalo because the previous year Buffalo didn't have big-bodied wide receivers, so that was Brandon Beane's attempt to insert what he wanted into the room, and then realistically, he didn't get that again until Keon Coleman last year, at least according to me. And I mean, Owen's in the chat, so Owen is also a Bills fan. He may have additional points there on Hodgins, but he just comped Trey Harris to Gabe Davis.
That's another good point. I do think that's a similar type of role as well. Trey Harris is really a tweener between that like field stretcher vertically and that like underneath threat. But also to the Giants, I have another guy that I thought would be kind of interesting, and it actually is Oronde Gadsden. And the only reason I say that name is because Brian Dable was the offensive coordinator for Alabama, I believe, O.J. Howard's sophomore year. And not necessarily saying that they're the same level of prospect or same player, but another one of those like vertical receiving tight end threats that you can play out kind of in that like slot Z type of role. That would be another fun one in New York in like late day 2, early day 3.
Yeah, so shout out on that one. So a former Giants offensive coach, I think it was, let's say, a quarterback coach or wide receiver coach, is now the offensive coordinator at Syracuse. So Syracuse's offensive coordinator has coached under Dable before. That's the Gadsden one. I think that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so what division you want to flip to next?
You know what? Let's stay in the NFC. We'll go to the NFC South. Let's get my Panthers out of the way. This one's a really easy one for me. And while it's not exactly, which is interesting considering the fact that Dan Morgan and Dave Canales have each had very similar types of wide receivers, and it's always been they have a really big physical X, and they have that second type of power slot Z type of guy, which they do have now. But it's very interesting if you look at who they've met with. They've met with Jack Betch, who is one of those power slot guys, which is very interesting considering that's pretty much all of Carolina's wide receivers is power slot guys. So when it comes to that, you kind of wonder if they're doing something different there and kind of filling into that like LA Rams type of deal where they have just a ton of power slot wide receivers like Puka and Cooper Kupp and even Ben Skoranek. Not necessarily a true power slot, but a guy that was like a really gadgety type of dude that really had his success in this spot in the slot. So I am gonna say Jack Betch for Carolina is a great fit for him, but I do struggle to kind of see how he would fit in there schematically, even though I know they like him a lot. And I know that it's a good fit, but just kind of who they have in that room already, Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, Adam Thielen, David Moore David Moore's not really a slot, but he's not going to be there either. Jack Betch is a fun one to kind of play in that role, maybe under Thielen for a year and let Coker take that X and Legette take that Z. And then moving on to the Saints, I'm going to go with the biggest name here on the board. That's going to be Tetairoa McMillan. If you look at it, Kellen Moore, when he was with Philly, he had that big wide receiver, A.J. Brown. And the year before, last year, he was with Los Angeles when they had Mike Williams. So if Kellen Moore is really getting the Saints job, which I'm really banking on this analysis because they have nothing to base it off on, because Pete Carmichael was the former OC, excuse me. Mickey Loomis, wait.
He's the owner.
GM.
Or GM. He's the GM.
Loomis was the GM. Carmichael was the ex-OC. They have always had that bigger guy who's more of a route runner. And while I don't think Tet's this special prospect, he's a guy that is probably worthy of taking in round one. I do like the Genty shout there. I do need to start hitting some running backs here soon. But yeah, Tetairoa McMillan there. They had Michael Thomas. They drafted A.T. Perry in the 5th round, and he had a couple splash plays last year and this year. You look at it, Lil Jordan Humphrey, but he wasn't obviously too much of a role. But, there's kind of a theme here. They love their X's to be bigger dudes. So that's why I think Tetairoa McMillan is a good spot, and I think it's a sneaky spot at 9 for the Saints. And then moving on to the Buccaneers, with all of this, with all this Godwin might be wanting to move on or type thing there. Jalen McMillan didn't really show much last year. He had a couple drop issues. I'd be very, very intrigued to also see a guy like Luther Burden kind of slot in there. They have that, Chris Godwin might not be necessarily known as a yak threat as much as he is like a possession, good hands, good route runner type of guy. Look, Luther Burden is a guy that can win and eat people alive in the slot. Jason Light has always kind of loved those yak threats. That's kind of been a big staple for him because you look back, obviously Chris Godwin was there. Jalen McMillan was a yak threat at Washington. They kind of avoided the guys outside of Mike Evans that were those big physical X's. And obviously, I don't think Jason Light was even there for Mike Evans or wasn't the GM who drafted him. So Luther Burden's a fun spot, like a really, really fun spot. And that'll be very dangerous with Baker Mayfield because you look at it, they had Jarvis Landry in Cleveland. And Jarvis Landry was Jarvis Landry's a good kind of one-for-one comp here with Luther Burden. They had Baker had Jarvis Landry, he had Odell, so he had those underneath yak threat guys in the slot. So I think Luther Burden in Tampa is a really good spot for him. And then moving on to Atlanta, they don't really need a running back, but I do think they need an inline tight end. I think they need one very badly. And while it's not necessarily the flashiest pick, you look at what the Falcons OC Zach Robinson had done in LA. they had guys like Colby Parkinson. They had guys, actually, I don't believe Colby Parkinson might have been a year later, but they had guys like Tyler Higbee, Gerald Everett, kind of guys who can, at least Tyler Higbee is a guy that can really get in there and do the dirty work and block. This one's not necessarily a flashy pick, but Jackson Hawes out of Georgia Tech, they need that inline threat as a blocker. Kyle Pitts doesn't offer that skill set. And when you look back, like I said, to the OC trends with LA and with Raheem Morris, obviously both guys from the Rams organization, what do they live off of? That kind of power gap run scheme. They were like the first to kind of like bring that back and re-revolutionize it after everybody kind of went into that like zone run scheme type of deal early on in like the 2018-17 type of range, 2017 and 19 type of range. And then McVay really revolutionized the gap scheme. And, you know, I think Atlanta brings a guy like Jackson Hawes in with Bijan Robinson, and you can really get stuff going there with an inline blocker. So while you might not necessarily think that a tight end is a skill position, I do. I think they're one of the most important positions in all of football. It's one of my hotter takes is that tight ends are very, very important. And if you don't have a guy that can block in line, you're not as valuable as a player. And Jackson Hawes can do that. And he offers a little bit for you receiving. Look.
Yeah,
again,
I saw that too. Actually, when you started saying tight end, I was like, okay, who's Cole gonna say? And I was thinking Hawes. Like it took right because you were kind of giving a good build up, good suspense. So I had a chance to think about it. I do like that call out. I do. So
got to get it some sort of blocking in for them. Solid offensive line. You have a great running back tandem with Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. Your wide receivers honestly aren't bad run blockers, and you really don't need many more wide receivers. I mean, look, maybe you need a 3, but Darnell Mooney and Drake London are very capable, and you get that rolling in a 12 tight end set, and it's not really even 12 with Kyle Pitts in there. You run basically 11 with Kyle Pitts not in line and he's kind of off the ball. You're working, you're playing with fire with gasoline there. So
cool. And what division are you going to go to next?
Let's hit up the NFC West.
Okay.
So a fun one is a really, really fun one actually is the Rams. This was one I really found a lot of interest working on, just kind of because how they scout and what they do. I really, 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 really like DJ Giddens there out of Kansas State. I know they don't need a running back, but I just kept finding myself when I would run through a couple mock drafts, kind of back it up. DJ Giddens is super fun. Just kind of cross evaluating with my evaluation and kind of how they fit. He can play in a gap scheme. He can play in a zone scheme. They run a good mixture of both. And while they are more gap heavy, they still have that West Coast type of deal with their run game where they love getting wide zone and everything along those lines. And I know you have Kyron Williams, but DJ Giddens isn't a guy that you can really get in there as the number 2 early on. And when you're kind of on the lifeline of Kyron Williams' contract running out and you don't want to re-sign him, you have DJ Giddens there sitting, backing him up. Look, he has not necessarily the greatest hands, but he has great route running IQ. He has really solid routes out of the backfield. And he offers some stuff in the screen game. And while there is some alarming drops on tape, it's not hard to clean up, and it's not necessarily a problem that's gonna like ruin his career, because eventually you're gonna learn how to catch the football. I mean, you look at Chuba Hubbard with the Panthers. Early on, he had fumbling problems and drop issues, and he honestly still does have drop issues, but he was a Pro Bowl caliber back this year. Chaz, what's the new Eastern Washington's kid's name? Chisholm?
Is that not Williams? No. I know who he's referring to. I want to say it's Kenny, but I'm going to go look up the player while you're talking.
Yeah, I forget his name, but another Jack Betch area, just because he is very similar to Cooper Kupp as well. But I just really love the DJ Giddens fit there. And I'm also going to give out a third option with LaQuint Allen kind of out of the backfield as a receiving back. That would just be fun. But I'm not going to harp too much onto that because I'm going to bring that up at a later point with someone else in this conference. So, yeah, Elton Chisholm.
Oh,
it was something
Elton Chisholm.
Weird.
Yeah, and I got to learn to leave the chats up. Sorry about that, Bill.
And then, look, we'll move on to the Seahawks. Another team that not necessarily in a weird spot with all of their skill positions because they are all very, very capable right now. You have DK Metcalf, obviously, but you have Tyler Lockett, who's getting up there in age, but now you have Jackson Smith and Jigba. They're at the bottom there to kind of come back up and take that Tyler Lockett type of role. I'm not actually going to look at wide receiver here. I'm going to look at tight end. And a guy that I think would fit very, very, very well there is Harold Fannin Jr. Kind of a you look at what Mike McDonald had down in Baltimore with Isaiah Likely, and kind of that similar type of mold there. With they had those like sort of not crazy athletic tight ends. I forget which Bennett brother it was, Martellus or Martavius. The tight end was there in Seattle, I believe. But Harold Fannin Jr. would be an awesome fit there. You get him in there as a inline tight end. You get him moving on those shorter routes, kind of down the seam. That would really work well with Geno in that offense. And obviously the guy brought back up in Baltimore, similar player to Isaiah Likely, with that like vertical threat type of semi-athletic tight end down the middle, down the seam, get him rolling down play action boots type of deal there. So Harold Fannin would be really, really, really fun down in Seattle. And then moving on to the 49ers. LaQuint Allen is an obvious choice here, but they have so many running backs, I'm not going to go there. But I did want to bring his name up again.
Do you like? I'm guessing you like LaQuint Allen, huh?
He's my running back 5. So yeah,
nice.
I really appreciate receiving backs. Kind of looking in that same type of mold though, with San Francisco. They need some sort of successor to George Kittle, and what better way to do that than go grab the Iowa tight end Luke Lachey? Seems like an obvious selection here. Kittle's getting up there in age. He's like, 32, 33. Might as well go grab the dude that can go out there and block and play fuck you football like I've been saying. I honestly did forget that Clint Kubiak went to Seattle. So shout out Bill there. But yeah, Luke Lachey would be really, really fun in San Francisco. You look at what they do with their draft. They love those kind of short route tight ends. They drafted Cam Latu in the 3rd round in 2023, I believe, out of Alabama. And what did he do in Alabama? He was a short route targeted type of guy. He would run often stick routes. He would kind of just get in the middle of the field and just sit. And Luke Lachey can do that. They can run a lot of that stick nod type of deal that they like running down in San Francisco. So Luke Lachey is a great, great scheme fit there. I feel like I'm missing a team. Cardinals, yep. Look, another great team for the Cardinals, or another great player here for the Cardinals is Matthew Golden. Again, I'm not going to go that direction. I'm going to go Tez Johnson. You look at a guy they had Greg Dortch, Monty Ossenfort had Rondale Moore, and while they didn't necessarily know what to do with them, they really, really were. They like those shorter, smaller type of gadgety wide receivers, and that's what Tez Johnson can be for them. He's 5'9", and he's way, way underweight, but you don't pass up on those guys, and they obviously aren't scared of those guys because they have Greg Dortch on their roster. They had Rondale Moore, so Tez Johnson getting in there just adds another type of weapon to that offense, and you're kind of running some sort of short king type of offense with Kyler Murray and Tez Johnson there. So that would be kind of funny to watch. But Tez Johnson in Arizona would be sick as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, in NFC North.
Let's go to the Packers. Let's try not to piss off Brian. Jaden Higgins is the first guy that I had written down when I was going over the Packers, kind of with that size threshold, sort of vertical threat. And it's a guy that Brian has also brought up a lot. So I kind of did take some information or some inspiration and information from him about that, kind of filling in that Christian Watson type of role. He would be really, really fun there as a vertical threat, bigger body dude who's a good route runner, way more refined as a prospect than Christian Watson coming out, and obviously less injury concerns, which is, unfortunate that it happened to Christian Watson because he's very talented, but at some point you got to move on. This is the third straight year, I believe, with a pretty serious injury for Watson, and you get in a guy like Jaden Higgins who scored a touchdown in like 7 straight games at one point last year. Insane. And honestly, kind of a little bit of deja vu there, looking at Christian Watson, who had like a 6 touchdown stretch with Green Bay in like 2023, I believe. So that would be a kind of fun pairing with Higgins and Green Bay there in that LaFleur offense. And then moving on to, let's do the Vikings. I really, really do think that for the Vikings, they need a running back bad. They need a running back really, really bad. I'm going to go with a fun pick here. I'm going to go with, I had 2 guys in mind when I was writing my notes for this episode, and it was Marion Hampton and Quinshon Judkins. And I think I'm going to go with Judkins for the sole purpose that he reminds me kind of feel-wise, not necessarily a perfect one-for-one comp, but he reminded me a little bit of Aaron Jones in his Green Bay days. Obviously not as much fumble concerns, but like with Judkins, you get him out of the backfield working on routes. He blocks for you. He blocks his ass off for a guy who, you wouldn't really assume to be a blocking back. When you look at it, he's an athlete that Minnesota loves to draft those sort of good speedster athletes, kind of linear type of guys at the running back position. And Judkins can be that for them. They don't need to take him round 1. They can take him round 2 or maybe even round 3. I have no idea how that running back class is going to play out. But I think Judkins in Minnesota would be a very, very fun pairing for Kevin O'Connell and his offense. And, you kind of look, what did J.J. McCarthy have at Michigan? They had a good running back and a good running game with Blake Corum and that good offensive line. So, maybe they attack offensive line early in the draft and they go Quinshon Judkins in round 2. That would be a really, really fun pairing in Minnesota for sure.
And just so you know, the Vikings don't have a 2nd-round pick that was traded to Buffalo to Houston to step for Stephon Diggs. But you can get Judkins in round 3.
100%. Same type of deal, Day 2, And then moving on to the Lions. They're a hard team to kind of get a blueprint out for just because they draft very cut and dry, but they don't have a lot of holes to fill. So it's hard to find guys that they would take earlier. I'm really trying to stay in that round 5 type of range on my board on the guys I'm choosing here. But a guy that I think would be very, very fun there is another guy similar to Khalif Raymond. And it's Tez Johnson again in a way, but I'm going to go with Jalen Noel here. Look, they have Khalif Raymond and, Brad Holmes had those gadgety wide receivers when he was in LA. Ben Skowronek was there. Cooper Kupp was there. They ran those gadgety type of sets. And while Cooper Kupp and Ben Skowronek, obviously 2 different wide receivers from each other and way different from Jalen Noel. Khalif Raymond's there in Detroit, and you see how they use him as a returner. You can use Jalen Noel that way. You can use Jalen Noel in all sorts of packages. And when you have a guy under, I forget which assistant they brought up to be their OC after Ben Johnson took the Bears head coaching job. But you have one of those. I think it was Tanner Longstrand took that job. I might be wrong. He might be taking the Jets, but a guy that learned under Ben Johnson who's going to know how to use those type of smaller, gadgety wide receivers. So I really, really like Jalen Noel there out of Iowa State.
Okay, and the Bears.
Ashton Jeanty, not much to say. They need a running back. pretty bad. They need a running game really bad. And Ashton Genty's a generational type of back. Personally, he's the best running back I have watched since I've only been, since I wasn't even alive to watch Adrian Peterson. I don't take this, to heart, but I think he's the best running back since Adrian Peterson, because I have been able to watch a good amount of running backs since he was drafted, and I don't think you get much better than AP, but I think Ashton Genty's a really damn good back, and he's pretty close to generational, if not generational in his own right. So not much to really say there. They love those wide zone gaps, like those flexible scheme, fluid type of running backs, and that's what Ashton Genty is. He can play in a gap scheme. He's patient enough to do that. He can play in a wide zone scheme. He can kind of get out and hit a gap and go. Contact balance is there, so we can work through those gaps. Not much to say. It's Ashton Genty. We all know about Ashton Genty. We all love Ashton Genty. But Bears at pick 10 pick 10 are running to the podium to take him if he's there, in my opinion.
Okay, and we are ready for the AFC. What do you got in the AFC West?
So, look, we're going to start off with the Chiefs. And I'm going to look towards that running back spot again. I think kind of looking at what they did with taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire, not necessarily a similar player, but again, sort of like I said about Quinshon Judkins being a similar vibe to Aaron Jones. I'm going to say Travion Henderson is a good fit there. Kind of, you see what they do with their running backs. They took Isaiah Pacheco. They love those guys that play hard. And while Clyde Edwards-Helaire got benched, his rookie year was not something to write off. He had a pretty good year for a rookie running back in 2020. I believe he was drafted 32 overall. Travion Henderson would be really, really fun there at the back end of the second or back end of the third. I forget if they have their second round pick or not.
They have a 1, they have a 2, they have an early third and a late third.
Yeah, so Travion Henderson back end like 63, I believe they'd be picking, would be a really, really good option for them. Blocks his ass off, can work for you in the receiving game, which they love to do with their running backs. It's a big thing for them is they will not take you if you offer nothing in the receiving game. You look at Kareem Hunt, you look at Isaiah Pacheco, and while you might not, think of Isaiah Pacheco as some sort of receiving threat back, he can do it a little bit, and it works for them. So you kind of look at that type of fit where you need to be able to catch the football. That's a common theme when I was looking over their entire sort of formula and what they look for in skill positions. You need to be able to catch the football, specifically at the running back spot. You need to be able to block, and you need to be able to run hard. And Travion Henderson does all of those three things very, very well. And while I might be a little bit lower on him, I think if you get him in Kansas City, he's going to be a dominant force for that offense.
Okay. And who next in the AFC West?
Let's do the Raiders. So I actually really, really love I love Trey Tucker down there. I love Brock Bowers down there. So, you don't really need a tight end. You don't necessarily, need to look at running back that early for them because you can take – I'm a really strong believer in running backs matter and you should take them early, but I don't think there's a running back, that they are going to be able to or want to take at pick 7 besides Ashton Genty, but then it just seems like a luxury pick for them that they don't have. You don't need a tight end because you have Michael Mayer and you have Brock Bowers, so you can run those 12 personnel sets. Excuse me. I'm looking at wide receiver here, and a really, really fun one for me is Kyle Williams. You kind of look at that Chip Kelly type of offense. They love those route runners and not necessarily the power slot guys, because Emeka Egbuka is another guy I thought about here. But with Chip Kelly being that OC, they love those route runner type of dudes. And Kyle Williams kind of reminds me of that, like Chris Olave type of route runner. And I brought him up. I said he kind of reminds me of Garrett Wilson as well. Just kind of the way that he goes in and out of his breaks. But Chip Kelly loves those type of route runners. He had Deshaun Jackson in Philadelphia. And, going down to Spy Tech, they have those route runners in Tampa Bay. Chris Godwin, I had harped on him already. So Kyle Williams in the second really seems like a really fun option for Las Vegas, and a guy that fits their scheme well. You pair him up there with Trey Tucker, who's a downfield vertical threat, who offers juice underneath as well. And then you get Kyle Williams, who can route you up on any side of the field, any hash, any yard marker. Bond's another fun spot, but I just don't think that, his hands are good enough. And Chip Kelly's a guy that really demands not necessarily perfection, but he demands almost what's close to it. It was a common theme with Ohio State is they were very, very on schedule. They were very repetitive, and they made sure that everything they were doing had a purpose. And that's why I really like Kyle Williams in the second or the third for them. Isaiah Bond's a great shout from Owen. But I just really get concerned about Isaiah Bond's hands and how that'll translate to what Spytek wants, what Kelly wants, and what Carroll wants. And then you also look to that Pete Carroll type of tree. They had those guys that were good route runners, Tyler Lockett, for example, at wide receiver for Seattle. So Kyle Williams is a good fit for them, hands down. Not really anything I need to touch on there besides route runner, good hands, has good athletic traits, and they need a wide receiver, so that's a good fit for him.
Okay, we have the Chargers and the Broncos left.
So I have a couple guys for the Chargers. I'm really trying not to duplicate, but I'm going to for the Broncos. Just a heads up for everybody watching. Look, the Chargers, they play fuck you football to the max. They love getting in your face and being physical. And when you think about physical guys at the wide receiver spot, you think about Pat Bryant at Illinois. That guy blocks his ass off. He had a 90-something PFF grade, I think, for blocking. I might be wrong. It might have been in the 80s, but I feel like I did hear it was in the 90s. Pat Bryant's a fun one. And then obviously Colson Loveland, Tyler Warren, those guys, there's the Michigan kids, and the big, fuck you tight ends. So kind of an easy spot to decide here. If you want to look at it, Joe Ortiz, likes those sort of vertical juice type of wide receivers, but that's not what Jim Harbaugh wants. And it's sort of Jim Harbaugh's ship there. As much as the GMs really do run the draft, there are some coaches who have a lot more input than others and who gets drafted. Little story and little tidbit about that type of deal. Back in 2007 with the Raiders, Lane Kiffin wanted Calvin Johnson at pick 1 instead of Jamarcus Russell, but I believe Mike Mayock was the GM at that time, I believe. Whoever it was.
I don't know if it was Mayock, but that was definitely an Al Davis pick.
Yeah, it might have been Davis. They selected Russell, and the coach was very against that. Lane Kiffin was very against that when he was with Vegas. And, it's sometimes not how it always works. That the coach is putting in that much input to what, the GM does. But with LA, I really do think it's a heavy coach influence type of franchise. So I think Pat Bryant or any of those early blue chipper tight ends like Loveland, like Warren, are very likely there.
And Broncos.
This is an easy one, and I feel like if any of the mock drafts or have just not been living under a rock for the past 6 months, Luther Burden's an obvious selection here. I like Jalen Royals as well. Don't necessarily need it, but not going to harp on Burden too much. That is the guy I'm going to say that's the number one scheme fit for him. Kind of, that Peyton offense, underneath threat. They had Joe Horn, I believe, in New Orleans. I believe that's his name.
Yep.
I forget who it was, but the truck driver who got signed to New Orleans and had some meaningful snaps was another underneath threat type of speed guy. So Luther Burden's an obvious one. Jalen Royals is fun because he kind of plays in that Denzel Mims type of role, that down the field vertical threat speed guy. And while I don't necessarily think Royals would be the pick for them at all, not necessarily at 20, I don't think Royals is the first round wide receiver, but I don't think he'd be a pick for them in any of their top three. But another guy I just wanted to give another shout out to for Denver, just kind of feels like I could totally see him rocking that Denver orange and blue. So, but Luther Burden's who I'm going to rock with there.
Okay, so the AFC South.
Looking at Jacksonville first, another duplicate, but another one that I can go more in depth on because it makes a lot more sense. Matthew Golden, again, out of Texas. You look at it, again, another similar player to that Christian Kirk type of route runner. Same thing with Terry McLaurin, those route runner type of guys. And while McLaurin's a little more athletically gifted for Washington, when I had brought Golden up for them, Christian Kirk, getting up there on his contract, and I believe he's like 29, so he's kind of hitting that receiver lifeline there because I don't really trust wide receivers that get past like 30, 31. So you look at it, Matthew Golden's really, really fun there. Good route runner. You can slot him in there with Trevor Lawrence and a great number 2 option of Brian Thomas Jr. And Golden can take that Christian Kirk role on a cheap rookie deal in the second for them. Absolutely. You got to be thinking about that if you're Jacksonville. I'm not exactly sure if they have brought in a GM yet. So another guy that was harder, another franchise that was a little bit harder to find some trends on. But if you kind of just look at their personnel and kind of, what Liam Cohen had, he was at Kentucky with Dane Key and Barian Brown. So, guys that are a little bit like that 6 foot to 6'1" range, and that good route runner and good athletic traits vertically is a big thing for Liam Cohen's offense. Again, with Godwin in Tampa, they drafted Jalen McMillan, who's another one of those vertical route runner type of dudes. Matthew Golden can be a juiced up version of Jalen McMillan with his hands, his route running. He's a lot more polished as a prospect. So that same type of deal really fits well in Jacksonville for him.
Okay, who else in the AFC South? Who's next?
Let's go with the Texans. A team that I really think needs a tight end, like pretty badly. I think it'd be very, very intriguing to bring a guy sort of similar to what, D'Amico Ryans had in San Francisco. I forget if they brought in a new offensive coordinator yet.
They did. I'll look it up for you.
All right. Just so I can remember clearly, because I'm not sure if I had written that down when I was listing them out. Matthew Golden's another name that's going to be very repetitive because he fits what a lot of teams want. Not necessarily going to go there because I don't think they need a wide receiver.
It's Nick Caley.
Do you know which team he was from?
Now I have to click the article to read it, so it's going to take it a minute. Apparently, podcasting and surfing the web at the same time is not good for bandwidth. Nick Caley, tight ends coach for the Rams, tight ends coach in New England, coach for the Patriots through 2022.
Oh yeah, this one's very, very easy. I'm gonna look at a guy kind of similar to that, like blocking. He can block, but you bring him in there. I'm gonna look at Elijah Arroyo here. Kind of raw, and this is like a cursed comp here, but I really don't want to say because I don't want to get the podcast canceled, but he reminded me a little bit of Aaron Hernandez.
You're not gonna get us canceled. We're allowed to say that. Like, I have to, just so everybody knows, I have to check a box on YouTube. Is it made for kids? And as long as I say no, we can mention like a murderer. Like, that's okay.
He reminds me of Aaron Hernandez minus the head case. So I think Elijah Arroyo would be a really good fit there. Vertical threat, can block, super, super raw still, and he's super young, but great route runner, offers a lot in the blocking game, and very, very similar type of deal like I had mentioned with Los Angeles, with that Colby Parkinson, Gerald Everett, Tyler Higbee. And then I forget, actually I do remember, New England had Johnny Smith, I believe, in 2022. They had Hunter Henry. Mike Gesicki, I think, at a point was in New England during that time span from 2022 to now. look, that Arroyo, it's a harder pick for Houston skill wise because they need a running back. Obviously, they don't necessarily need a wide receiver, but I question the health of Tank Dell. BC's had some unfortunate type of health issues, and it hasn't been his fault. Obviously, he got that leg injury from getting shot in the off season. Stephon Diggs had the ACL, but I don't even know if he was on a multi-year contract.
No, Diggs is out. So the Texans, I think the Texans would be one of 3 teams who I think draft all 3 skill positions.
They definitely could be one. It just kind of depends on the order here because they need a lot, but what they need isn't necessarily like premium positions. They need interior offensive line. They need running backs. They need tight end. They need a wide receiver 2 or 3. You look at that, it's very hard to fill those holes. But luckily for them, this is a great draft to fill those holes. It's a great tight end class, great running back class. The wide receiver class is not great up top. I don't think there's guys that are worthy of a necessarily top 10 pick, but you have those guys that can be adequate starters for you in that 3rd round range. So there's room for them to make these picks, but I think Arroyo is a great spot. Is a great pick for Houston.
So it's interesting because the next team I was going to have you do is the Colts. Like for me, my comp for the Colts would be Arroyo because of the Raz, and the Colts like the athleticism. But who do you like for the Colts?
Easy insert here. It's Tyler Warren. But if we don't want to go Tyler Warren early and they want to hit like Malachi Starks, a guy like Gunnar Helm is very interesting in the 2nd or the 3rd. Another very athletically gifted vertical threat tight end that they've been missing for forever because, they get that one good Linsanity run out of Mo Alley Cox once a year where they'll have like fucking 2 touchdowns and like 75 yards and like 5 receptions, and then you won't hear from him again. And he'll finish the season with like 365 yards and like 4 touchdowns, and like a 5th of those stats came from that one game. And you can't live with that in the NFL anymore. Like you can't live with just neglecting using your tight end. And Shane Steichen had Dallas Goedert in 2022 for Philadelphia. So tight ends it was very strange to see them not necessarily kind of fix that hole the past 2 years with Shane Steichen there. But Gunnar Helm's a really interesting one. I'm going to lock in Tyler Warren, but Gunnar Helm is a guy to watch out for Indianapolis as well.
Okay, and the last team in the AFC South is the Titans.
Yeah, Titans are a weird one. I'm going to lock in Tetairoa McMillan, but I'm not necessarily like I said, I'm not necessarily comfortable with any of their spots. I really like Chigakonkwo at tight end, like a lot. He's a great vertical threat. I think they could use a second guy like Jackson Hawes or one of those blocking heavy guys. Maybe like a CJ Dupree later in the day 3 range, or maybe get fucking weird and take Robbie Oots, the fullback H-back out of Bama as well. But I think Tetairoa McMillan is a great. Are we calling Travis Hunter a skill position though? I have him graded as an athlete because I don't know what he's gonna do. I don't know. He's very similar as a wide receiver to Calvin Ridley in my opinion. But I just get a little nervous that that people just think that the corner upside's too high and they take him as a corner and not as a wide receiver. And while I do think he's a better wide receiver than a corner, I just don't necessarily think that Tennessee would take a wide receiver at 1. So Tetairoa McMillan is a weird one, but it's a scheme fit type of deal there. And Brian Callahan had T. Higgins. That's kind of they love their bigger body dudes. And Travis Hunter is similar to that Jamar Chase type of vertical deep threat playmaking type of dude. They kind of already have that like way off brand like Kmart version in Calvin Ridley of Jamar Chase, and not the same type of player anymore that he was in Atlanta. But, you can live with that for an extra year. So, maybe later in the draft, you look at a dude like, let me pull up my board. Let me just see. But it's just a weird spot because Tennessee needs their quarterback, and I just don't see them taking Tyrone McMillan number 1 overall. But maybe you look at a dude like Alec Iomanner, or maybe Torrey Horton later, or Savion Williams would be a fun one.
Yeah.
Kind of later.
Owen gave you the Io Manor to the Titans in round 2.
Yep, I like that. I like that as well. So that's a fun spot as well too.
Yep. Okay, so we made Bill Sparks wait for the AFC North. So who do you got for the Browns?
Browns are a fun one considering they have Jerry Jeudy, who I think is a good 2. But you look at number 2 overall, I don't think they go with a skill position there. Ashton Genty's a fun one. Nick Chubb's on his last leg, which is unfortunate. I love Nick Chubb. But, later in the draft.
Excuse me. I'm catching your flu over the internet.
Yeah.
Not really, but.
Fun one for Cleveland would be Ty Felton, maybe in the 3rd. I think could be really, really fun. You want to look at that running back type of thing. Damian Martinez, very, very I really think I'm going to lock that in. Damian Martinez, maybe round 3, kind of not necessarily Nick Chubb level of a player, but that bruiser type of gap scheme running back that they really love in Cleveland would be a really, really fun pick for them. You look at it like tight end, another guy I could see is Gunnar Helm there. They kind of have that sort of vertical threat with David Njoku, and they have that 1-2 punch with the FAU kid. I forget his name.
It's escaping me. I'm not familiar with the Browns roster.
I forget I can't remember his name for the life of me, but the Florida Atlantic, he was drafted like 3 or 4 years ago.
Is that a wide receiver or a running back?
Tight end.
Oh. Hunter Bryant.
Yeah. But I think Damian Martinez will be a very, very good fit for Cleveland. They love those downhill bruisers type of running backs. And Damian Martinez is kind of shifty for a guy that's like 235 pounds at like 6 foot. He's huge and he can move well. Not a Nick Chubb clone by any means, but a guy that fits that scheme to a T, and kind of what Andrew Berry likes to have.
Okay, so what do you have for the Steelers?
Steelers are a weird one. I'm going to lock in Emeka Egbuka. I don't see them necessarily drafting wide receiver first round. That's just never been what they do. But another guy that I really, really find interesting for them is Caden Prather later in like that 3rd, 4th type of area. I am higher on Prather. I have about a 2nd to 3rd round grade on him. But, you kind of look at, that size range. They drafted Roman Wilson last year. Antonio Brown, not similar players, but similar size. I believe Prather measured in at like 5'9" or 5'10". So they love those like intermediately like that, like 5'10", like 5'11" type range wide receivers for there too. So Emeka Egbuka's fun there in the power slot type of role. And then you look at, like I said, Caden Prather out of Maryland is another fun player for them that I could totally see them taking later in the 3rd.
So I have a question, Owen, if you are still watching. Was Caden Prather on the wide receiver list that you watched? Because I don't think, we did scouting reports on him, but they didn't come back high enough to recommend that you watch him. So I'm curious if he was one of the 30 guys that you watched. Okay, so we did Browns, Steelers, Bengals.
So Bengals are another weird one because you look at it, they probably need a tight end. This is another one of the teams I could totally see drafting all 3 skill positions. I like their wide receiver room. I'm not sure what happens with T. Higgins. That's going to be a big determining factor on what they do. You kind of look at Jaden Higgins as a fun one there, maybe in the 2nd, just kind of that bigger body wide receiver who can kind of move. But I'm not going to go that direction. I'm going to go to the running back spot, and I am going to hit LaQuint Allen and lock that in. You had Joe Mixon who could do it in the receiving game. LaQuint Allen can do that too, and honestly, they are a similar type of feel of player. LaQuint Allen, man, the clip against it might have been Cal. the option route is probably the best running back clip I've seen all year, besides the Ashton Genty run against Georgia State, I believe. Just wicked type of receiving back, and that's something that Cincinnati really needs. They have Chase Brown, but he has receiving issues. And LaQuint Allen really fits that role and fits that type of scheme where you can kind of get him rolling and maybe play him out wide if you want to like motion him out of the backfield and go into an empty set, or if you want to run him out of the backfield and just have him run screens all day, because they love those slip screen type of plays, which is they run like a very Madden like offense, like a 12-year-old playing Madden, where they run like 4 verts and they run halfback slip screen and like inside zone and call it a day. So LaQuint Allen really fits there. But like towards the receiving core, you got I wish I knew what was happening with T. Higgins, because they can't pay Trey Hendrickson and they can't pay T. Higgins, and they can't afford to keep paying Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow the same amount of salaries that they deserve with paying those 2 guys as well. So one of them is going to walk, and while I do think it'll end up being Trey Hendrickson, if it does end up being T. Higgins, this is a whole nother conversation, and a team that I could totally see taking Ted McMillan in the first round, regardless of all their other needs, just because that offense is so wide receiver heavy and so big body threat with T. Higgins heavy that they're going to need to fill that role, and they can't afford to do that in the second or the third with, being in that mid-second type of range for their second-round pick. So it's an awkward spot if they choose to not re-sign T. But if they do, LaQuint Allen is a great pick there in the fourth or third round for them, for sure.
Okay, and the next team is the Ravens.
Ravens are a fun one, just because they need that type of threat. Alec Iamaner's a guy I'm going to lock in there. You really hope he turns into what Rashad Bateman should have been. Kind of that like vertical underneath threat that can do it all pretty much out of that Z spot, can play the X, can play the power slot if you need him to. So Alec Iamaner, don't really need to harp on him too much. Obviously there was like that production concern, but he does hit my production threshold of 2,000 yards. But a lot of that came from the literally unwatchable quarterback play out of Stanford this past year. I honestly watched one game and decided to just grade him based off his 2023 tape because it was so bad. I literally could not watch the 2024 tape because of the quarterback play at Stanford. So Alec Iamaner would be a really fun pick there in the back end of the first. I don't necessarily think he goes that high, but he's a polarizing player and a polarizing prospect, and a dude that really fits that Ravens scheme. You pair up with Zay Flowers, so you can play in that slot, and then you have Alec Iamaner outside, and you kind of get that offense rolling with Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and Alec Iamaner. Dude, that's a potent offense.
Okay, and we are now off to the AFC East, the Miami Dolphins. I think I know who you're going to pick, but Miami Dolphins.
Isaiah Bond's an obvious one.
That was the obvious one I was thinking of.
Yeah. So Isaiah Bond, it's a fun one there. Tez Johnson's a fun one there. But I'm going to look towards that, that second tight end. Johnny Smith's really, really good. And I've been a really, really big defender of Johnny Smith. He's been one of my favorite players for some reason since I was like 10 when he was back on the Titans. Probably because of the sick like one-handed catch he had against I believe the Ravens in like 2019, 2020 playoffs. It was like he's like one of my favorite players in the league right now. But they need another dude desperately who can go out and block. And when I kind of look at that type of fit that they want, you're not really going to get that. So I teeter back and forth right now. So I am going to lean to that wide receiver spot, and I'm just going to lock in Isaiah Bond because they're so hard to pick a schematic fit for, because they have so many like stupid like thresholds. Like they just want the fastest motherfuckers on the field, and that like doesn't work half the time. And you wonder why they go like 10-7 and like miss the playoffs. Dude, Armaj Reed Adams is such a Dolphin. So is Parker Brailsford. Next year, the Dolphins are taking both of those guys, and they're not going to think twice about it. And Parker Brailsford's really good, but they're just so stupid with how they draft. It actually makes me so mad. Like, why are we drafting guys that run 4.3s just because they run 4.3s? Like, Isaiah Bond's not that good as a wide receiver, unfortunately. He's a solid route runner, but you have the injury concerns, you have the hands and drop issues, and that just fits the Dolphins type of deal there. And they love those wide receivers that are just fast. So Isaiah Bond's going to be the easy pick here. I actually can't get over how annoyed Chris Greer and Mike McDaniels make me when they draft, because they just draft the guys that just go fast and are small. And it actually pisses me off so much because they wonder why they go 10-7 each year and lose in the wild card round of the playoffs because they play a team in the cold.
Okay. Next AFC East team is the Jets.
Jets are fun. Look, you kind of look at a dude like, they had back when Aaron Glenn was with Detroit and their OC was from Detroit. I forget which young assistant they poached from him. But they obviously had Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Emeka Egbuka is a fun one there. They obviously had Khalif Raymond, who I brought up before. So Tez Johnson, Jalen Noel's fun there as well. Tetairoa McMillan's fun. They have Garrett Wilson. So pairing Tet with Garrett Wilson would be a really fun pick. So I am going to lock in Tet just because of the unsureness I had about him going to Tennessee. So I am going to lock in Tetairoa McMillan there, kind of just pair him up there with Garrett Wilson. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Dan Campbell and that crew of Aaron Glenn was with Detroit when they had Kenny Galladay.
Ooh, I'm unsure.
I forget what the timeline was on that, but they definitely had some. They had a bigger body wide receiver. I just can't put my finger on it. But Tetairoa McMillan's an easy pick for the Jets. They need another playmaker outside. Garrett Wilson can't do it all. You got to lock in a bigger body dude for sure.
Okay, 2 teams left. The Patriots.
They're a difficult spot. Tetairoa McMillan's an obvious pick for them as well, just because of what Mike Vrabel had said. I'm going to look kind of towards that running back type of room because they have Ramondre Stevenson. They have Antonio Gibson. Ramondre's getting up there in age and he has the fumbling issues. And Antonio Gibson's 28, 29, which I did like Antonio Gibson a lot in Washington. But right now, obviously, that's that's a dead dream. He's getting up there in age and he's just not the same type of player. I'm kind of looking at that Dylan Sampson or maybe Cameron Skattebo type of mold. I really like Skattebo there for New England just because he plays that, you got to look at how the franchise is running into their motto. You got to look right on the surface, and they're the Patriot way. And Cam Skattebo plays motherfuck football, and he just wants to get his 4 yards in a cloud of dust and just make sure he hits you hard enough so you don't want to hit him again. So Cam Skattebo is a fun option there. You get him in that Mike Vrabel offense, which is run, play action bootleg, run, play action bootleg, run. That type of deal that he loved running down in Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry. Cam Skattebo is an easy pick. Cam Skattebo, Derrick Henry, absolutely not. But he plays that same type of ferociousness and, I want to hurt you type of football, type of ideology. So that's an easy selection there.
Okay, so Owen's a Bills fan and I'm a Bills fan, and we saved the Bills for last. So the pressure is on. Who is your best skill position fit for the Buffalo Bills?
Let's get weird here. I'm gonna list out a couple guys for you, for both you guys. Matthew Golden, obvious one there, is a fun idea. Savion Williams, the guy that I think I'm going to lock in there kind of in the second or the third round. That's very, very, maybe with your second round pick, you take him at, I believe, 62 is where you guys are selecting for your second.
56 and 60, but yes.
Savion Williams at 60 would be really interesting because as much as Gabe Davis was not good this year with the Jacksonville Jaguars, that role was very much missed with the Bills offense. You obviously had Khalil Shakir but he didn't necessarily live up to that hype that, was building up with him on the offseason. Keon Coleman needs to be in the power slot, but they're not going to put him there. They didn't this year, so why would they change that now? He can play the Z fine. Why not take Savion Williams to play that Gabe Davis power slot role? Bigger dude, 6'2", 210 pounds, super fast yak threat. He, people are going to get scared with the helmet scouting and see like the same type of build as Quentin Johnston, but I don't think they're similar players. I think Savion Williams is way more refined with his hands as a hands catcher, and that was one of Quentin Johnston's biggest flaws, was that he called with his body a lot. But Savion Williams almost plays like Larry Zonka from the Dolphins.
I love it.
There's too many times on film where this is a con, but like I love it personally that he just goes to like seek out contact, and it's great. Like it's terrible ball carrier vision.
Yeah. So I do agree with Owen. So I was actually going to have you pivot. If you had to pick somebody that separates downfield or gets open downfield.
Oh, easy. Then I'd say Kyle Williams or Matthew Golden are my top two guys that come to my head. But if we want to go further down the list, we got guys like, obviously, guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, Ricky White, Jalen Royals.
So I like the Ja'Cory Brooks. We haven't mentioned him, but I like that mention.
Jalen Lane is another fun one. I don't necessarily know if he fits, but another guy that gets open down the field. Another guy that doesn't necessarily get open down the field, but is like to that level, but is super fun. Maybe somebody like Kobe Hudson later in day 3. But now that you mentioned that, I'm going to completely pivot my answer from Savion Williams to Xavier Restrepo. Like, hello, best route runner in the class, of course. Xavier Restrepo would be a dude for Buffalo.
Okay, cool. So we just went through 32 teams, approximately 25 different skill players. So, Cole, you want to introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, how they can find your content?
Yep. You can find me on Twitter or X at all lowercase ColeP_NFL. I post draft content. I post player clips, pretty much every day. Post my draft board, write articles. So I do pretty much everything. I do the draft year round. I'm already working on 2026. Super pumped up for April. Best day in the world, April 26th, but yeah.
The draft is better than Christmas for me too.
Draft's better than the Super Bowl, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, we were even saying that in Mobile. We were saying the draft is better than the Super Bowl because the draft gets to celebrate all 32 teams. The Super Bowl is only about 2 teams.
Yeah.
But I'd like to give a shout out to the channel. So Cole is one of 33 podcasters at the Draft Professor. So we have 33 people bringing you daily draft content. This show is just a warm-up. In 15 minutes, Josh and Randall come on, and they're going to do about 15 players that are going to be overdrafted because of their traits. So we're going to go over players whose traits don't match their on-field production. And then we're also going to do a scouting combine preview of the players that we think are going to blow up the combine. So I'm sure you're going to hear Isaiah Bond's name mentioned, and I'm sure you're going to hear Deone Walker's name mentioned, as well as a few others. But that podcast comes on at 9:15 Eastern, which is 20 minutes from now. We have generally 2 podcasts a day, one at 7 Eastern, one at about 9 Eastern. And I can't thank people like Cole enough for helping us put this content out. We would not have the channel if we didn't have people like Cole that can put this together while he's still in the flu. So my hat's off to you. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Cool. So we are going to shut this one down. But on behalf of Cole, the 33 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you for watching, everybody, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.